The wind carried the dry smell of dust across the lonely plains, the kind of sharp scent that told folks a storm was still hours away, but trouble was already close. In that part of the old American frontier, trouble never needed a reason. It could rise from the ground like heat waves, born from greed, hunger, or the kind of coldness a person learned from hard living. That evening the sun was sinking behind the broken land, and its fading light slid across a narrow trail, where a young girl walked with her head low and her hands tight around the thin shawl over her shoulders. She moved as if she wished to blend into the shadows, as if hoping the world would forget she existed. Her stepfather's voice still rang in her ears, though he was far behind her now. It was a voice that carried no warmth, a voice that had only grown sharper since her mother died. She had spent months trying to keep the small cabin in order, hoping kindness would come back to him the way spring winds return after long cold nights. But kindness never returned. Only more bitterness, more drink, and more strangers who came by with the wrong kind of laughter. This time, when she tried to pull away from one such visit, she learned the truth. He had given her away to drunken men in exchange for coin and more liquor. The memory of the moment still made her chest tighten. She had not waited long enough to hear the rest. As soon as she understood what he planned, she ran without looking back. Her heartbeat had pounded in her ears, pushing her feet forward, pushing her out into the wild land where she had never walked alone. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to get far, far from that cabin before those men came. The land ahead was empty except for scattered brush, and the old wagon road stretched like a thin scar across the valley. She had grown up hearing stories about the dangers of wandering alone. Riders, outlaws, lost travelers, even old spirits that drifted between the cliffs. But she knew with every breath that going back was worse than any story ever told. As she walked, she kept glancing toward the thickening dusk. Every sound made her flinch a little. A low rattle of dry leaves, a distant hoofbeat, the faint cry of a hawk. The frontier could swallow a person fast if they didn't know how to read its warnings. She tried to calm her shaking hands as she moved farther from the trail, following a narrow stream that cut between two ridges. She hoped the sound of water would steady her thoughts, but the rush of it only reminded her how alone she was. Her footsteps slowed when she reached a bend in the stream, where the ground dipped and tall grass leaned across the bank. She sank to her knees, cupping the cool water to her lips. The relief of it washed over her for a moment, but fear returned the instant she heard unfamiliar movement behind her. She froze. The grass rustled in a way the wind could not make it move. For a breath, she thought the drunken men had followed her. Panic crashed through her chest as she rose to her feet, ready to run again. But before she could take a step, a tall shadow appeared between the ridges. It was not her stepfather. It was not any man she had ever seen. He sat on a strong horse with the kind of straight-backed calm that came from someone who lived close to the earth and understood every part of it. His dark hair fell loose to his shoulders, and his skin carried the warm tone of the people her town often spoke of in hushed voices. Apache warrior, they called them, as if the word itself was something sharp. She had only seen one from a distance, once years ago. But none of those distant figures seemed as striking as the rider watching her now. He did not move closer. He simply sat his horse in silence, the kind of silence that seemed to steady the air around him. She could not read his thoughts, and she feared what he would do. Folks in town said the Apache did not trust settlers and stayed far from them. They also said he was fierce, though she had never heard a first-hand account. She felt small beneath his gaze, yet something about him felt different from the people she had run from. There was no wild hunger in his eyes. Only alertness, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of concern. She stepped back, unsure of whether to speak. But the rustling behind her returned, louder this time. She spun around, fearing the worst, and saw two shapes emerging through the brush. The men her stepfather had been drinking with. Their staggering steps, the smell of liquor on their clothes, the rough way they looked at her, all told her what she already knew. They had been close behind her all along. Her pulse rushed so fast she could hardly breathe. She tried to move away, but the brush trapped her skirt. One of the men grabbed her wrist, and she felt a jolt of terror run through her limbs. she cried out, not knowing if anyone could help her out here in the wild land, but someone heard her. The Apache rider was no longer on the ridge. He had moved so fast she did not even see the moment he descended. His horse thundered across the ground like a streak of lightning. Before the drunken men could drag her back, the warrior brought his horse to a sudden halt a few feet away. The force of it made dust rise around them. He stared down at the two men, his expression sharp now, no longer calm. The men stepped back at the sight of him. Even in their drunken state, they sensed something they could not challenge. There was a strength in his posture, a certainty in his hands as they tightened on the reins. He spoke, but his voice was quiet, almost steady enough to hide the warning in it. Though she could not understand his words fully, she recognized their meaning from the tone. He was telling the men to leave. They did not. One tried to pull her again. That movement changed everything. The horse shifted forward, and in a single swift motion, the warrior reached down and lifted her onto the saddle in front of him. She gasped as he steadied her with one arm, the warmth of him stronger than she expected. His horse turned sharply, hooves kicking up dirt as he moved them away from the danger. Behind them, the drunken men shouted, but their voices grew small as the horse surged forward with powerful strides. She clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding from fear and confusion. She had never ridden with anyone before, let alone an Apache warrior whose face held both strength and mystery. The wind rushed past her as the ridgelines blurred around them. She looked up at him, trying to understand why he had helped her. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He had saved her without knowing her name, without asking her anything. But she could not tell whether he was taking her toward safety or another kind of danger. The frontier had its own ways, and she was now riding behind a man whose world she did not know. The sky darkened fast as night approached. His horse slowed near a cluster of tall rocks that shielded them from the open land. He stopped there and looked out across the plains to make sure no one followed. She stayed quiet, unsure of what to say or what he expected. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. When he finally turned his gaze toward her, she felt a strange pull in her chest. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had come for her, and where he planned to take her now. But before she could find the words, distant voices echoed from the valley behind them. Harsh voices. Familiar ones. The same men were not giving up. The warrior's eyes hardened as he listened. He shifted in the saddle, ready to move again. She realized then that her escape was far from over. And whatever came next, she was no longer alone but also not yet safe. The night was closing in, and danger was riding fast behind them. The warrior did not waste a moment once those distant voices reached him. With a quick shift of his hand, he guided the horse away from the rock shelter and toward a narrow crease in the ridge. The hooves hit the ground with steady rhythm, not fast enough to draw attention but quick enough to put distance between them and anyone trying to track their path. She held on tightly, feeling the muscles of the horse move under her and the solid strength of the man behind her. Fear still clung to her chest. Yet something else was building there too, something she could not name. They moved along a winding trail carved by old storms. The land grew steeper, the ridges rising like dark walls on each side. Sagebrush brushed her skirt as they passed. She kept her head low, afraid to look back. Every so often the warrior lifted his chin slightly, listening, checking the wind or the ground behind them. His sharp awareness made her wonder how many dangers he had survived before finding her beside the stream. She tried to understand him through small details. The way he kept his back straight even when the trail turned sharp. The way he handled the reins with the same care someone might use while touching something precious. His horse trusted him completely, moving as though it could sense his thoughts before he gave any command. She had known men her whole life, but none had carried themselves like this. Everything about him felt steady, grounded, and sure. Yet she could not forget that she knew nothing about his world. He guided the horse into a narrow canyon where the shadows grew thick. The air cooled. Water dripped somewhere nearby, echoing softly. When the horse came to a slow halt, she realized he was giving the animal a moment to rest. She stayed still in the saddle, unsure if she should speak. But he dismounted first, moving with silent steps. He then reached for her with a gentle gesture, helping her down from the horse without a single word. When her feet touched the ground, she felt unsteady. He watched her carefully, as if trying to understand whether she could stand or if she needed support. She nodded to show she was all right, though her legs were shaking. The canyon walls rose around them like a shelter built by nature, with tall stone pillars blocking most of the sky. Only a thin line of twilight shone above. He walked to the mouth of the canyon, crouching low as he scanned the valley for signs of movement. She studied him from behind, noticing the small markings etched on his skin like faded stories. She wondered what each symbol meant. Maybe victories? Maybe memories? Maybe warnings? She wanted to ask him but did not dare. After a moment, he returned to her side. He spoke a few words in his own language, his voice low and steady. She could not understand the meaning, but something in his tone told her he wanted to know if she was hurt. She shook her head and placed her hand lightly over her heart to show she was only frightened. He nodded once as if satisfied. The quiet deepened between them, not uncomfortable but filled with questions left unspoken. She wondered what he thought of her. She was a stranger from the settlement, dressed in worn clothes and carrying nothing but fear. She worried he might think she would bring trouble to him. And maybe she already had. Those men had seen him help her. That could lead to more danger for him and for his people. The frontier did not take kindly to lines being crossed, especially between settlers and Apache. As these thoughts weighed on her, he motioned for her to follow. He guided her deeper into the canyon where smooth rocks lined a shallow stream. He gestured for her to drink and clean her hands. She knelt by the water, letting the coolness calm her shaking breath. When she lifted her eyes, she saw him gathering dry grass and stacking it near the wall. He was preparing a small shelter for them to wade in until the danger passed. The simple kindness stirred something inside her. She had not felt protected in a long time. Not since her mother died. The memory of her mother rose in her mind like a warm color in a cold world. Her mother had always believed the frontier still held good people, even in harsh times. She wondered if this warrior was proof of that. As the sky turned from purple to deeper blue, he motioned for her to sit near the canyon wall. He kept himself between her and the open valley, a silent shield. The sound of the stream was soothing, but she could not fully relax. Her mind kept circling back to her stepfather, the cabin, the shouting, the look in those drunken men's eyes. She did not want to return to any part of that life. She hoped the warrior understood she was not asking him to return her there. He seemed to sense her worry. Without speaking, he took a small piece of charcoal from a pouch and drew a circle on the ground, then pointed toward the canyon walls surrounding them. It was his way of showing that they were safe there for the moment. She nodded in understanding. Though she still feared the men would not stop searching, his calm gave her a small thread of hope. She wished she could ask him what he planned next. Was he taking her to his people? Would they accept her? Would they turn her away? Settlers always spoke about Apache camps with fear or suspicion, but she had never met anyone from there. She did not know their ways. She wondered whether they would see her as a burden or as someone who did not belong. He sat near the entrance of the small space he had cleared, watching the shadows carefully. His posture remained alert, almost unmovable. She studied his profile in the dim light. His strong jaw, the lines of focus near his eyes, the way he held his breath now and then to listen more closely. The land seemed almost part of him, as if he drew strength from it. The silence stretched until she finally found her voice. She thanked him softly, her words trembling a little. He turned his head toward her, his eyes warm with understanding. He rested his hand lightly over his chest, giving a short nod that said he accepted her gratitude. Still, she felt he deserved more explanation. She pointed toward herself, then made a gesture of running, hoping he would understand she had escaped something. He listened carefully, watching her hands. She pressed a hand to her heart again, then made a motion as if pushing someone away. His eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. It was more like he was fitting the pieces together. Finally, he nodded again, a deeper nod this time, one that told her he understood there were people she needed protection from. The distant voices had faded by now, swallowed by the night. but worry still sat heavy on her. Her stepfather knew where she usually went. The men might circle the area again. The frontier was wide, but not wide enough to erase danger completely. The warrior rose suddenly, looking toward the ridge with sharp focus. She followed his gaze, her breath catching. The night wind had shifted, carrying faint sound. Not voices this time, but something else, hoofbeats, steady ones. Many of them. Her throat tightened. More riders. Maybe the same men? Maybe others? She did not know which was worse. The warrior stepped toward his horse, placing a calming hand along its neck. The animal let out a quiet snort, but stayed obedient. He glanced toward her, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. They could not stay any longer. Whoever was approaching was getting closer, and the canyon would trap them if they did not leave in time. He lifted her onto the horse again, his movements firm but gentle. Then he mounted behind her, taking the reins with purpose. His horse sensed the urgency and moved the moment he pressed his heels. Lightly against its sides, they slipped through the back end of the canyon, following a narrow trail that most settlers would miss. The moon rose overhead, casting silver light across the rocky ground. Her breath shook as she listened to the hoofbeats behind them grow louder. The riders were not close enough to see them yet, but close enough to chase if they broke into the open. The warrior guided his horse toward a hidden path that curved between tall cliffs. Each turn felt like a gamble. Each shadow felt like a warning. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady despite the danger. She wondered how a person could be so calm when the world was closing in around them. The path opened into a sweeping valley hidden from the main trail. The land there was quieter, covered in tall grass that swayed gently in the moonlight. Far ahead, she could see faint shapes, almost like small shelters or lookout points made from wood and stone. She wondered if that was where he lived, or if it was only a place he knew well enough to hide in. His pace slowed slightly as they crossed the grassland. He kept glancing behind them, checking the ridge. The riders were not yet in sight, but the sound had not stopped. They were somewhere out there, pushing through the darkness. She tightened her grip, feeling the tension in the air grow heavier. The valley felt peaceful, but peace could shatter fast on the frontier. She could sense something building, something that would change her life even more than the escape. Beside the stream, the warrior guided the horse toward the shadow of a tall bluff. He paused there, letting the horse breathe. She could feel the nearness of something significant, though she did not know what. Maybe the place ahead would give answers. Maybe it would bring new fears. The night wind picked up again, brushing against her hair. She looked at the warrior, hoping he might explain what came next. But he only glanced toward the distant ridge, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed. Whatever lay ahead, it was bigger than the danger behind them. She felt it in her bones, and the riders were still coming, and the night seemed to lean in to listen. The warrior kept his eyes on the ridge as if he could see through stone. The young girl could feel his body tense behind her, even though he still held the reins with steady hands. The wind carried faint sounds across the valley. A shout, a distant laugh that did not sound friendly. The creak of leather saddles. Whoever was out there was not wandering. They were searching. He turned the horse toward the dark side of the bluff, where the rock face dropped down into a narrow cut. At first she thought it was just a shadow, but as they grew closer she saw a hidden path twisting between the boulders. He guided the horse with care, ducking his head as they slipped into the passage. The tall rock walls muffled the sounds from the open land. For a few moments, all she could hear was the horse breathing and the quiet scrape of hooves on stone. Her mind drifted back to the cabin she had run from. She thought of the way her stepfather had looked at her that afternoon, eyes fogged from drink and pockets thin from lost work. She had stood by the table, clutching a small rag in her hand, listening as he muttered about bills and bad luck. She had tried to help once, offering to take in sewing for neighbors, but he had only laughed and told her a girl like her was more useful in other ways. She had not understood then. When those men came, it became clear he had not dragged her to them. He had only stepped aside, letting their greedy looks fall on her while he stared at the coins in their hands. That small act cut deeper than any shout or slap. It told her what she meant to him. Less than a bottle? Less than a full meal? Less than his own comfort? She had thought losing her mother was the worst thing that could happen. Now she knew there was something colder than death. Being treated like she did not matter at all. As the horse moved through the hidden passage, she wondered what her mother would say if she could see her now. Riding behind an Apache warrior through the dark bones of the land. The old stories from town had always warned women to fear men like him, but it had been a man from town who tried to sell her. It was this warrior who had lifted her out of danger. The world did not seem as simple as the stories had made it sound. They came out of the passage, into a wide hollow tucked behind the bluff. The moonlight caught on low shelters built from wood, canvas, and branches. A few small fires glowed like watchful eyes, their flames held low and careful. People moved quietly between them. She saw women wearing woven skirts and men with quiet steps and children peeking out from behind their elders. It was an Apache camp, set in a place no white settler would find by accident. The warrior slowed his horse as they entered, and the camp grew still. Dozens of eyes turned to them. First they looked at him, then at the girl sitting in front of him. She felt their gaze like a weight pressing on her shoulders. She did not know if she should look down or meet their eyes. She chose to keep her head straight but respectful. An older man stepped forward, his hair braided with gray and his face marked by years of sun and wind. His expression was firm, but there was a quiet wisdom in his eyes. He spoke to the warrior in their own language, words clipped and serious. The warrior answered in a low tone, explaining what had happened. Though she could not understand the language, she could sense the tension between duty and risk in every exchanged glance. The older man looked at her again, longer this time. She felt herself shrink under that study. She tried to stand straighter, though her legs were still unsteady. He said something short that made a few of the others murmur. The warrior replied, his voice calmer but sure. For a moment, it looked as though they might refuse to let her stay. Then the older man sighed as though carrying a heavy weight and gave a single nod. The camp returned to motion. A woman with gentle eyes came forward and took the girl's arm with a kind touch. The warrior slid down from the horse and gave a few quick instructions. The woman led the girl to a small shelter near the hollow's edge. The air smelled of smoke, herbs, and the faint scent of drying hides. Children stared, curious, until one of the elders called them away. Inside the shelter, the woman handed the girl a blanket and a small cup of warm broth. The taste was simple, but it soothed the cold that had settled deep inside her. The woman spoke a few words in broken settlement language, enough for the girl to understand that she was safe for the moment. She asked the girl's name. For a second, the girl could not answer. No one had used her name gently in so long that it felt strange on her own tongue. Finally, she whispered it, Lena. The woman repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. Then she nodded and pointed to herself, Naomi. Lena tried the name, and the woman's eyes warmed. Small as it was, that moment felt like someone had lit a lantern in a dark room while she ate. Lena could hear low voices outside the shelter. The warrior and the older man were still speaking, their tones shifting between concern and firmness. Other men joined in now and then. She knew they were talking about her, about the riders still out there, about what might happen if the settlement decided to blame the Apache for taking a white girl in town. The sheriff liked to keep the peace as best he could, but he was quick to listen to loud voices. Lena could imagine the scene already. Her stepfather stumbling into the small office, weaving a story about how an Apache had taken his girl, leaving out what he had tried to do. The drunk men backing him with angry words, eager to hide their own shame. The sheriff gathering a posse in the name of justice. Riders eager for action in a land where excitement was rare. The real story and the one told in town would not be the same. That was the heart of the conflict building around her. She felt caught between two worlds, neither of which she truly belonged to any more. Naomi touched her shoulder lightly, drawing her back from her thoughts. She pointed to the blanket again and then at the ground, encouraging Lena to rest. But Lena's mind would not follow such a simple command. She lay down, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on the shifting shadows inside the shelter. The crackle of distant fires and the measured voices outside stitched together a restless song. The warrior, whose name she still did not know, stood at the edge of the hollow with the older man. From where she lay, she could see their profiles against the moonlit sky. The older man spoke with a kind of weary authority, gesturing toward the valley beyond the bluff. The warrior listened, his jaw tight. Their words were quiet, but the meaning was clear. This girl was trouble they had not asked for. Yet she was also a person in need, and their honor did not allow them to turn away so easily. The older man was more than a leader. He was the warrior's father. Others in camp called him a title that meant chief, but between them there was also the weight of family. The father had seen what happened when settlers twisted stories to fit their own fears. He had seen soldiers ride out in the name of protection and leave grief behind. Bringing Lena into their hidden camp could give their enemies a reason to come closer. For the warrior, the matter was more simple and more complicated at the same time. He had seen a young woman in danger. He had acted. His spirit would not let him do otherwise. Yet even he could not ignore that his choice had tied all of them to her fate. While they spoke, a younger man approached, breathless from a long ride. He had been out scouting near the settlement. His report was not good. He had seen men gathering near the saloon, some carrying rifles, others leaning hard on their saddles. He had heard pieces of their talk through open windows. A girl taken. Apache tracks near the stream. Anger rising like heat. The chief's face grew more lined as he listened. He glanced toward the shelter where Lena lay and then back at his son. The younger riders in the camp shifted uneasily. They did not fear a fight, but they knew too well that when settlers rode out, they rarely cared who was guilty or innocent. They only saw what they wanted to see. Inside the shelter, Lena rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket tight. She thought of the sheriff, of neighbors who had sometimes given her an extra biscuit when her stepfather had forgotten to cook. Would they believe what truly happened? Or the version that made better gossip over drinks? The thought made her stomach twist. She also thought of the warrior. She wondered what had driven him to be so far from his own people when he found her. Maybe he had his own ghosts to outrun. Maybe he had lost someone to the same harsh land that had nearly taken her. She could not know, but she sensed a quiet hurt buried under his steady calm. The subplots of their lives began to weave together in the darkness. In town, a man struggled with his own guilt even as he lied to protect himself. Out here, a young warrior struggled between the duty to his people and the pull of his own heart to shield a stranger. And Lena herself struggled against the fear that she was nothing more than a burden wherever she went. The night grew colder. Naomi slipped back into the shelter and set down a small bundle near Lena's feet. Inside were simple clothes, cleaner and sturdier than what she wore. It was a silent offer to shed at least one layer of the life she had run from. Lena's throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi smiled, a small tired curve of the lips that carried kindness. Then she spoke again in her soft mix of words, telling Lena something about mourning, about decisions that would have to be made. Lena nodded, though her heart pounded at the thought. Outside, the warrior finally stepped away from his father and came closer to the shelter. He did not enter. He only stood near the opening, looking in at her through the dim light. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She saw the weight he carried. He saw the fear she tried to hide. Neither of them spoke. He turned his gaze to the stars above, as if searching for answers in their cold light. The main conflict had taken clear shape now. A girl who refused to go back to a life that treated her as something to trade. A camp that did not want war but was willing to defend its own. A town ready to ride under a false story. And in the center of it all, an Apache warrior on his horse. Bound by honor to a stranger whose presence could bring trouble down on everyone he loved, the hollow felt calm on the surface. But under that calm, tension coiled like a drawn bow. Choices would have to be made with the sunrise. None of them would be easy. And while the fires burned low and the camp settled into uneasy rest, somewhere out on the dark plain, Saddles were being tightened and rifles checked by hands that believed they were riding out to set a wrong right. Without ever knowing the truth, the hollow remained quiet as the night settled deeper. But the silence felt thin, stretched over fear that could break at any moment. Lena lay awake long after Naomi left the shelter. Her eyes stayed fixed on the narrow opening where the dim glow of distant fires flickered like nervous hearts. She could still hear faint murmurs of the warriors posted at the edges of the camp. Every soft footstep in the dirt made her muscles tighten. Every whisper of wind reminded her that riders were somewhere out there. Closing in, she shifted under the blanket, unable to ease her breathing. The warmth of the broth Naomi had given her was gone now, replaced by the cold truth that dawn would bring decisions she was not ready for. She curled her hands together, thinking about the warrior who had brought her here. She remembered the strong hold of his arm when he lifted her onto his horse, the way he placed his body between her and danger without hesitation. She did not even know his name, yet he had become the only steady point in a world tipping out of control. Outside the shelter, she sensed movement. The warrior walked past the opening, pausing only a moment to glance in again. Even in the dim glow, she recognized him. His posture was alert, shoulders squared, head held high as he looked across the valley. He was preparing for what was coming, and she knew he expected trouble before the sun rose. She sat up a little. Her voice was soft, but he heard it. "Will they come tonight?" He didn't step inside. He just stood there, half-shadowed, and gave a slow shake of his head. Not at her question, but at the uncertainty itself. She realized the truth. He did not know. He could track riders, read the wind, understand danger long before others sensed it. But he could not predict what desperate men would do. When their pride or lies pushed them forward, he gestured toward the blanket. And she lay back down, though neither of them truly rested. The firelight outside revealed him settling near the shelter's entrance, as if he had decided he would be the first to face whatever tried to break into this quiet place. Time blurred. When she finally drifted into a thin sleep, it lasted only until the faint sound of hoofbeats reached the hollow. She bolted upright, heart pounding. The warrior was already standing, spear in one hand, his expression fierce in the pale early light. Voices rose across the camp as the others prepared. Men grabbed bows, spears, and shields. Women gathered children closer, guiding them behind the shelters where the shadows were thicker. Naomi hurried into the doorway and placed a steady hand on Lena's shoulder. Though Naomi's face remained calm, her eyes held the sharp brightness of worry. The warrior turned his gaze toward Lena. For a moment, she felt a strange pull in her chest, like invisible threads tightening. He did not need words. His look told her he intended to protect her no matter what storm approached. The hoofbeats grew louder, not one or two. Many died, then they faded again. The riders had not come into the hollow. They were circling the bluff, searching for an entrance. The chief walked to the warrior's side. Their conversation was brief but heavy. The chief motioned toward the distant ridge and then toward Lena. The warrior stiffened, his eyes narrowing. He shook his head with a firmness that startled her. The chief spoke again, more insistent this time. Naomi interpreted in hushed settlement words. He thinks it too dangerous for her to stay. Lena's breath caught. She had expected this, yet hearing it aloud made the ground tilt beneath her. If she left the camp, those men would try to take her. If she stayed, the Apache risked becoming targets of a false story. Either path carried danger. The hoofbeats swelled again, echoing through the valley walls. Warriors climbed the rocks quietly, moving toward lookout points to track the riders. Tension pulled tight across every face. The chief and the warrior continued arguing in low voices. Lena stepped out of the shelter, her legs trembling but her resolve steadying. Naomi tried to pull her back, but Lena shook her head. She needed to face whatever came. She walked toward the two men. Her steps were uneven, but she did not stop until she stood before them. They both turned to her. She bowed her head respectfully, then lifted her eyes, hoping her voice would not fail. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me. I don't want your people blamed." Her words were soft but clear. The warrior stared at her with a mix of frustration and disbelief. He didn't speak, but his expression said enough. He did not accept the idea of her walking out to danger alone. The chief crossed his arms. His gaze was hard yet not unkind. He spoke with slow, measured tones that Naomi translated carefully. He says the settlement will not listen to truth. They only listen to fear. Lena swallowed. She knew it was true. She had lived in that town long enough to understand how fast a lie could spread if it offered someone a story to shout about. She turned toward the opening of the hollow, where warriors kept watch. Through the thin line of sky above, she saw a faint trail of dust in the distance. Riders were starting to climb the ridge. Her time was running out. The warrior stepped closer to her, his jaw set with unspoken determination. He said a few sharp words to his father, then pointed toward the western trail that led deeper into the mountains. He rested his hand over his chest and then pointed toward her again. As if telling his father he was responsible for her fate now, the chief stared back at him for a long, tense moment. Then he let out a breath that carried the weight of a man who had made too many hard choices. He nodded. The warrior wasted no time. He motioned for Lena to follow him toward his horse. Naomi pressed a small pouch of water into Lena's hands and wrapped a light shawl around her shoulders. The quiet sympathy in her eyes made Lena's throat tighten again. As Lena approached the horse, she felt the camp's eyes on her. Not with blame, but with a mixture of sympathy and fear for what she was about to face. She climbed onto the saddle, and the warrior mounted behind her with practiced ease. His presence felt strong, protective, familiar in a way she could not explain. He guided the horse toward a narrow path that led deeper into the mountains. Warriors lined the bluff, watching him leave. The chief stood like a lone pillar near the center of the camp, his lined face shadowed with worry. They had barely reached the first bend in the rocky path when a sharp whistle cut through the air. One of the Apache scouts on the ridge was signaling danger. The riders had found the entrance. Lena twisted to look back. Dust rose in thick clouds as horses approached the lower edge of the bluff. Angry voices shouted orders. The warrior pressed his heels into the horse's sides, urging it faster up the narrow trail. The path shook a little as the horse climbed higher. Loose stones tumbled down the steep slope. The warrior used one arm to shield Lena from the edge when the trail curved sharply. His other hand held the reins with steady force. She could hear the determination in his breath, feel the urgency in the way he leaned forward with each stride of the horse. Behind them, men's voices grew louder. "They're coming," Lena whispered. The warrior already knew. He pulled the horse sharply to the left where a narrow spine of rock rose like a jagged wall. He guided the horse behind it, hidden from view. The riders thundered past below, without seeing them, but that bought only moments. They continued upward until the valley below shrank beneath them. The wind grew colder, the sky pale with early light. The mountain cliffs cast long shadows over the path. For a moment, Lena felt her breath return. She thought they might escape unseen. Then a warning cry rose from the ridge. Above, one of the riders had spotted their movement. Lena looked up to see two men breaking from the main group, climbing a parallel ridge on horseback. They were determined, desperate, and climbing fast. The warrior's horse surged forward again, but the trail was tightening. Ahead, jagged rocks narrowed the path until it became barely wide enough for one horse. They were being pushed into higher ground, where there was only one way forward and no easy way down. The warrior understood it too. She could feel the tension in him. He steered the horse toward a natural arch of rock. Beyond it, the land opened into a hidden meadow that lay between cliffs like a secret kept by the mountains. Tall grass covered the ground. A small stream glimmered under the sunrise. For the first time since they left the camp, the warrior slowed. His eyes swept the meadow. He recognized it. This was a place he knew, a place he trusted. Lena's heart slowed with the horse's steps, but not enough to shake off the fear. They were safe only for a breath. Only until the riders found the trail behind them. The warrior dismounted and helped her down quickly. He guided her toward the shelter of a large boulder and then moved to check the entrance of the meadow. His body remained tense, ready to defend. The hoofbeats began again, echoing through the arch, growing louder. Lena looked at the warrior. His silhouette stood tall against the rising light. his back straight, his shoulders strong. His hand resting near his spear, he stood like someone prepared to face whatever storm reached them. She felt the world balancing on a knife's edge. The riders would break into the meadow any moment, and the choices made in the next breath would pull every thread of their story toward the turning point, toward a climax that waited at the edge of the rising sun. The riders burst through the arch just as the sun cleared the ridge, their shouts tearing the quiet meadow apart. Lena pressed herself against the boulder, her hands trembling at her sides. The warrior stood between her and the danger, one foot planted firmly in the grass, the other slightly behind as if bracing himself against a strong wind. His horse snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing the rising tension. Lena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every moment felt stretched thin, ready to snap. But when the riders came to a jarring halt at the edge of the meadow, something unexpected shifted. The men pulled their horses up short, panting from the hard ride. Their clothes were dusty, their faces drawn tight, but their eyes widened when they saw the warrior standing calm and steady instead of attacking. He did not raise his spear. He did not shout. He spoke in a clear tone, steady as the sunrise behind him. Lena could not understand the Apache words, but the rhythm told her he was not meeting their aggression with more aggression. He was offering truth before anyone took another step. The men hesitated. They exchanged glances, unsure how to react to this calm. The leader, a tall man with a hat worn from sun and sweat, tried to steady his breath. Lena recognized him. He was the sheriff's deputy, a man who usually kept peace during town troubles. His face was hard now, but not hateful. He looked past the warrior and spotted Lena, his eyes filled with confusion. Then surprise, then something like shame. "Lena," he said, almost disbelieving. "We were told you were taken." She stepped out from behind the boulder, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "I was not taken. I was running away." Her words hit the men like a gust of cold wind. They had not been prepared for that answer. The deputy frowned, confused. "Your stepfather said the Apache grabbed you." The warrior stepped aside slightly, letting her speak for herself. Lena faced the riders with the strength she had been forced to find. She explained it simply, with no dramatic words. She told them she had fled because she had not been safe at home. She told them the warrior had found her when she needed help. She made it clear he had saved her from the men chasing her, not dragged her away. Silence fell on the meadow as the riders tried to take in the truth that did not fit the story they had been given. The deputy rubbed his hands over his face, embarrassed. A few of the other men shifted in their saddles, unsure where to look. None of them had expected the girl to stand strong behind the Apache warrior. Finally, the deputy cleared his throat. "Your stepfather didn't tell us any of that. He said you were taken right out of the cabin." Lena held her ground. He lied because he knew trouble was coming for him. The deputy stared at her a long moment. He had known her mother once, known the good family they used to be before life turned mean. Now he saw a young woman standing braver than he expected. He let out a breath and nodded slowly. He looked at the warrior. "You were trying to protect her." The warrior did not speak in English, but he dipped his head once in a calm nod. It was enough. The deputy turned to the others. "We ride back. This isn't our fight anymore." Some of the men hesitated, embarrassed that they had been stirred up by half a story. But the deputy's voice carried enough weight that the argument died before it began. One by one, they turned their horses around. Hoofbeats echoed through the meadow as they rode back the way they came. Not with anger this time, but with a heavy understanding that they had almost created a fight where none was needed when the last rider disappeared beyond the arch. Lena's breath escaped her in a shudder. The warrior turned to her then, his eyes softening. For the first time since they entered the mountains, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to ease. She stepped closer to him, her voice gentle. "You kept me safe again." He lifted his hand, touching his chest as if saying he had only done what was right. She understood him without needing the words. They rode back toward the hollow at a slower pace. The journey down the ridge felt different this time. The danger that had clung to the air like smoke was lifting. Birds returned to the sky. The wind softened its edge. Lena felt a strange warmth settle in her heart. The meadow, the path, the high cliffs no longer looked like places of fear. They looked like the beginning of something new when they reached the hidden camp. Warriors watched from the bluffs, ready for a fight that never came. Relief passed through the camp like a soft wave when they saw the two return unharmed and the ridges empty of threats. Naomi rushed forward with a bright spark in her eyes. Lena climbed down from the horse and the woman embraced her lightly. It felt like coming home to someone she had known far longer than one night. The chief approached, his expression grave but not cold. He listened as the warrior shared what had happened in measured tones. The chief's eyes moved to Lena. Instead of the suspicion he had shown before, there was now a deeper patience. He saw not a burden, but a young woman who had told the truth in front of men who wanted to believe lies. He spoke a few words, and Naomi translated. He says, "You are welcome here for as long as you choose. No one will force you to return to the place you ran from." Lena's throat tightened. She thanked him with a quiet voice. The chief rested a hand briefly on his son's shoulder before stepping away. The gesture filled with trust. Days passed, and the mountains became gentler each morning. Lena helped Naomi gather herbs and learned simple tasks around the camp. Children grew comfortable enough to sit near her, listening to her stories of small-town days. In return, they taught her how to weave thin strands of grass and how to follow tracks in soft earth. She felt herself healing in the calm rhythm of the camp and the safety of its people. Each day she saw the warrior. He would ride out early to scout the land or hunt, then return by dusk with quiet steps and a steady presence. They spoke little at first, using gestures and simple words. But soon she began to understand small pieces of his language. He began learning parts of hers. Their conversations were soft, like threads woven carefully, building something neither had expected. One evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge in warm colors, he led her to the same stream where she had washed the dust from her hands that first night. The water shimmered with gold. He pointed to the mountains and then to her heart. As if asking if she wanted to stay in this place for good, she looked at the land around her. The open sky, the wind carrying scents of sage and pine, the camp that had turned into a sanctuary, and him always steady, always near. Her answer formed with no doubt. She nodded. His smile was small but full of quiet relief. He touched his hand to hers, not demanding anything more, simply promising that whatever came next, they would face it together. From that moment, Lena felt her life shift into a new chapter. The fear that once ruled her steps had faded. The harsh past no longer chased her. She found peace in the hidden valleys, in the voices of the people who welcomed her, and in the steady presence of the warrior who had saved her not once but twice. The town eventually learned the truth. Word spread through the settlement that the deputy had returned with a calmer story. Some folks whispered out of habit, but most realized the mistake made from rushed judgment. Lena's stepfather left town soon after, unable to face the shame he had created. No one tried to follow her again. In time, Lena found more than safety. She found belonging. She found a new home in the mountains and a new life shaped by kindness instead of fear, and each morning, when the sun rose over the ridges, she would stand beside the warrior who saved her on his horse. Knowing that the old dangers had passed and the new days ahead were full of hope, the frontier still held storms. But she now walked through them with steady steps. Stronger than she ever believed she could be, the land that once frightened her had given her a second life, and the man who rode out of the shadows had given her a future she never imagined.